What on earth do you think you're doing, Alex? My dad's voice sliced through the living room, sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. This business, this content creation, this isn't a path. It's a joke. Do you even realize you're wasting your life? My mom stood there, her face not angry, but etched with a disappointment so deep it hurt more than any of my dad's rages. Alex, how many times have we talked about this? You need a plan, something realistic, a degree, a stable job. Why won't you just listen to us? I stood in the middle of the room, feeling like I was shrinking. My hands clenched, fingernails digging into my palms. They didn't get it. They never got it. I wanted to scream, to yell that I was building something, my own world, a career that wasn't the mold they'd precast for me. But I stayed silent, each word of theirs stabbing at me like tiny knives. They thought I'd flop completely, but I wouldn't, not ever. They thought I'd flop completely, but I wouldn't, not ever. And one day, I'd make them watch me succeed. This is the story of how I turned their doubt into my drive, of how I defined success on my own terms, despite every single prediction. It's not just about me, it's about anyone who's ever been underestimated. Ready to see what happens next? Then don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you don't miss this journey. You'll want to see how this turned out. It all started when I was little. I'm Alex Carter, the only son of Dr. Robert Carter, a leading orthopedic surgeon, and Judge Eleanor Carter, a powerful federal prosecutor. Sounds like the perfect family, right? Dinner conversations revolved around complex surgeries or landmark legal cases. Summer vacations were trips to historical museums or scientific conferences. From a young age, my path was set. Excel in school, get into an Ivy League, and become something prestigious: a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, anything but what I actually wanted to be. I'd always been drawn to what my parents called low-yield pursuits. When other kids were watching TV, I spent hours hunched over an old camera, trying to capture everyday moments, little stories no one else noticed. While my friends were obsessed with sports teams, I devoured video games, not just playing them, but analyzing them, trying to understand how they were made. And when everyone talked SAT scores, I dreamt of storytelling, of creating worlds and experiences others could lose themselves in. When I was 15, I started my YouTube channel. It wasn't about gaming, nor was it a daily vlog. I wanted to tell stories, carefully crafted narratives, blending visuals, sound design, and voiceovers to create a unique experience. I spent countless hours in my room, learning editing software, studying script writing, and doing everything myself. My parents, they didn't really get it. At first, they thought it was a childish hobby. "Oh, little Alex is playing filmmaker," my mom would say, with a hint of indulgent pride when I showed her my first video. My dad would just nod, preoccupied with his phone. As I approached my senior year of high school, with hundreds of videos and a small but loyal YouTube community, I told them I wanted to pursue content creation or indie game development after graduation. The silence in the dining room that night was suffocating. "Are you serious?" My dad put down his fork and knife, the clatter jarring. "Content creation? Game development? That's not a career, Alex. That's a hobby. You need a degree, a solid foundation." I could study computer science and still make games, I tried to explain. Or I could study film and then what? Make Hollywood movies? Live off YouTube ads? My mom let out a little laugh, a cynical, disbelieving sound. Alex, we've invested so much in you. We've given you the best opportunities so you can have a secure future. Don't throw it all away for some pipe dream. It's not a pipe dream, I retorted, my voice trembling. This is my passion. I can make this work. Passion doesn't pay the bills, son, my dad said, his voice cold. Innate talent doesn't compare to discipline and a clear plan. You have to understand, this is for your future. We just want you to succeed. And that was the crux of it. Success in their eyes was a degree, a high-paying corporate job, social standing. Me, I wanted to define success on my own terms. But they never listened. I was a child, and they were adults, the ones who knew better. As graduation approached, the pressure mounted. They sent me to endless, boring career orientation sessions, pushed me to apply to prestigious universities for dry, uninteresting majors I had no desire for. You need something to fall back on, my mom would insist. Something to hedge your bets. Hedge my bets for what? For a life I didn't even want to live? I started feeling suffocated in my own home. Every meal was a trial. Every word was a needle prick at my self-esteem. Susan's daughter, Jenny, just got into Yale Med, Alex. Do you know how hard she worked? Or your cousin Mark is about to open his own law firm. Do you have any plans for your future? They didn't realize that every time they compared me to Jenny or Mark or anyone else, they weren't inspiring me. They were crushing me. I didn't want to be anyone else. I wanted to be Alex. I started spending more and more time in my room, door firmly shut. I threw myself into my projects, seeing them as an escape. My YouTube channel, the tiny game project I was secretly working on, the stories I wanted to tell, that was my world where I could breathe. I knew I was betting everything. I knew they thought I'd fail. I could feel it in their eyes every time I mentioned my dreams. But that, ironically, became my biggest motivation. I wouldn't give up. I wouldn't disappoint them, not in the way they thought. I'd make them proud, on my own terms. I still remember the night I made the decision. It was a few weeks before high school graduation. My parents were talking about student loans, about which electives I should take at a university I didn't even want to attend. I sat there, looking at my computer screen, where my little YouTube channel glowed back at me. Hundreds of hours of work, hundreds of stories told. This was my world. I'm not going to college, I said, my voice so quiet it surprised even me. They both stopped. The silence in the room became heavy again. What did you say, Alex? My dad asked, his voice strained. I'm not going to college. I'm going to pursue content creation full time, and I'm going to teach myself game development. My mom put a hand to her forehead. Alex, what are you talking about? This isn't a joke. You know how we've prepared you for this. I know, but it's not the life I want. That was the night I almost got kicked out. They didn't literally kick me out, but they cut off all financial support. If you want to live in your fantasy world, my dad said, his eyes cold as ice, then you're on your own. We won't pay for a career that has no future. I moved out of the dorm room I never wanted, renting a tiny damp apartment on the outskirts of the city, near a slightly more artsy hipster neighborhood. The savings from my bookstore job and the meager earnings from my YouTube channel barely covered anything. I told myself, this is freedom. This is the start. But freedom came with harsh realities. Rent, utilities, food. Everything was more expensive than I'd imagined. I took on odd jobs to make ends meet. Delivery driver, coffee shop barista, even a virtual assistant for an online pet store. Every evening, I'd return to my tiny room, fire up my old laptop, and start creating. I worked tirelessly. I learned basic programming languages, tinkered with design tools, studied successful YouTube channels. I tried to make higher quality videos, tell more unique stories, find ways to connect with an audience. But the subscriber count crept up slowly. Views trickled in. The positive comments were few compared to the dozens of negative ones. So boring. You have no talent. Get a real job. Some nights I lay in my creaky bed, staring at the ceiling, tears silently tracing paths down my face. Loneliness gnawed at me. Doubt began to creep in. Were my parents right? Was I really wasting my life? I remembered the comfort of my old house, the warm meals, and the perceived security of a pre-planned path. There were times I picked up the phone to call my dad, to tell him I was wrong, that I'd go to college, major in something like business, but then I'd stop. If I gave up now, I wouldn't just be disappointing them, I'd be disappointing myself. Phone calls with my parents became infrequent and strained. Every time I mentioned my work, their voices were laced with skepticism. Alex, how much have you made from that channel yet? Is it enough to live on? You know your cousin Mark just got promoted at the law firm? They constantly compared me to my cousins, to their friends' kids, the ones on the right path. I felt like a failure in their eyes, a stubborn child who had rejected everything they deemed best. I just want you to have a secure life, my mom said on one call, her voice tired. Do you know how hard it is out there? I don't want you to struggle. I knew they loved me in their own way, but that love came with tight expectations and a fundamental lack of trust in my choices. It hurt more than any direct criticism. Yet, amidst the struggle, I found a glimmer of hope. I started frequenting a small coffee shop called the Pixelated Palette, a gathering spot for indie artists, small game developers, and content creators like me. They didn't have expensive suits or prestigious degrees, but they had burning passion and a deep understanding of what I was trying to do. There, I met Maya. Maya was a freelance graphic designer, a few years older than me, with bright purple hair and a wonderfully eccentric style. She had a vibrant energy and an optimistic view of the world I hadn't encountered before. The first time I told her about my YouTube channel and my little game project, her eyes lit up. Oh, what are you working on? That sounds awesome, she said, without an ounce of judgment or skepticism. Maya was the first person to truly listen to me, not to evaluate, but to understand. She believed in my ideas, offered practical advice on community building, video optimization, and even helped me design a few logos and assets for my small game project. She introduced me to others in the community, people who were also struggling but never gave up. I started to feel less alone. The conversations with Maya and my new friends at the Pixelated Palette fueled me. They didn't tell me it would be easy. They just told me what I was doing mattered and that I wasn't doing it alone. Time passed, and I kept pushing. With Maya's encouragement, I started submitting my little pixel art narrative adventure game to a few indie game development competitions for new creators. I didn't have high hopes, just wanted some experience and feedback. Then the email arrived. My project had been selected as a finalist for a regional showcase. This was a huge break, a beacon of light in months of struggle. I poured every ounce of energy, every spare dollar, and every idea into refining my demo. Maya spent hours helping me with UI design, even pulling an all-nighter with me to finish a soundtrack loop. I felt energized, believing in my path for the first time in a long time. And then, just when everything was looking up, a massive roadblock hit. A week before the final showcase presentation, I received an email from a law firm. They accused my game project of plagiarizing certain art assets and core narrative elements from a well-known game by a major publisher. I was completely blindsided. I had crafted everything myself, from scratch. There was no plagiarism. I instantly knew who was behind it. That publisher had a popular game, recently released, with some similar adventure narrative elements. I'd played it, but it never occurred to me it would be an issue. Then it clicked. The father of an old college acquaintance, someone who'd always scoffed at my dreams, was a senior lawyer at that very firm. He'd used his position to launch a preemptive strike against me. "This is what I warned you about, Alex." My mom's voice on the phone sounded tired and almost triumphant. "I told you the world out there is brutal. You have no protection. You have no experience. Just quit, son. Don't waste any more time." My dad was colder. "We can help you navigate this, but on one condition. You drop this career of yours and you go to law school or medical school. It's the only way you'll ever be able to protect yourself in the future." Their words were like knives twisted into my nascent belief. Rage and despair swelled within me. I felt like I was on the verge of crumbling. All those sleepless nights, all the sweat, all the dreams, they could vanish because of a baseless accusation. Should I take their offer? Should I retreat to the safe path they'd always laid out? I holed myself up in my room for 3 days, barely eating, just staring at my computer screen. My game code, my design sketches, my script lines, they all seemed to mock me. I genuinely didn't have the funds for a big shot lawyer. I was going to lose. I was going to fail. And they would win. That's when Maya showed up. She practically kicked down my door, carrying a bag of snacks and a determined glint in her eye. "Hey, you planning on staying in here forever?" she said, tossing a bag of chips at me. "They might think you'll give up, but I don't." Maya wasn't a lawyer, but she was a fighter. She helped me research, digging through legal fine print, and even connected me with an indie game developer support organization. They found a clause in copyright law that allowed me to contest the claim, especially since my project was non-commercial and only a small part of the original idea. Moreover, they unearthed a pattern of that major publisher bullying smaller developers to squash potential competition. "Alex," Maya said, as we sat in our usual coffee shop, "you can't let their fears define you. If you give up now, you won't just prove them right. You'll prove they can control your life." Maya's words hit me like a splash of cold water. I looked at her, then around the coffee shop. My new friends, also struggling but never giving up. I remembered the sleepless nights, the sweat I'd poured into this. This was the path I'd chosen. I had to fight. I didn't have the money for a fancy lawyer, but I could defend myself. I spent the remaining days cramming copyright law, preparing my arguments, and rehearsing my presentation. I wasn't just going to defend my project, I was going to defend my right to dream. On the day of the final showcase, I didn't just present my game. I told the story behind it, the story of being accused, of the unfairness of a huge corporation trying to crush a small project. I presented my evidence, explained why my ideas were original. The audience and judges listened in silence. Maybe I wasn't a born orator, but I spoke from the heart, with fierce conviction in my work. In the end, though I didn't win first place, my project made waves. I received the Spirit of Innovation Award and a small grant from an investment fund to continue developing my game. More importantly, my story about being bullied by the big publisher went viral, catching the attention of the indie gaming community. I received hundreds of messages of support, advice from seasoned veterans, and even small collaboration offers. It wasn't the roaring victory I once dreamed of, but it was a victory nonetheless. It was proof that I could stand on my own 2 feet, fight against bigger forces, and defend what I believed in. After that showcase, things started to change, slowly but surely. The Spirit of Innovation Award wasn't a huge sum of money, but it gave me recognition and enough funding to focus full time on my game. I no longer had to juggle odd jobs. Every morning, I woke up with a surge of excitement, diving into the world I was building. The indie game community was amazing. They understood the grind of pursuing a passion without a safety net. I received invaluable advice from veteran developers, encouraging words from the small but growing fan base on my YouTube channel, and even collaboration offers from a few other pixel artists. Maya continued to be my most steadfast ally, not just helping me with graphics, but also being a constant source of emotional support when I felt discouraged. Within 6 months, I had completed a beta version of the game and released a small demo on indie game distribution platforms. The initial response was incredible. Small streamers picked up my game. Tech blogs started featuring it. While there were still bugs and room for improvement, everyone praised the unique storytelling, art style, and the sheer creativity they hadn't seen elsewhere. My YouTube channel also began to soar. I didn't just post videos about my game. I shared my development journey, the challenges I faced, and the lessons I learned. That authenticity resonated with more people than I could have imagined. From a few thousand subscribers, the numbers swelled to tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Small brand deals and ad revenue started coming in, enough for me to have a stable income. Not lavish, but enough for me to live on my own. My mom was the first to notice the shift. She often watched my videos. I knew it from the anonymous views coming from our home IP address. One time she called me. Alex, her voice had a hesitant quality. I see you're doing quite well. Your videos, they're quite interesting. It wasn't a gushing compliment, but coming from my mom, it was a massive acknowledgement. My dad was tougher. He still maintained his stoic demeanor when I called, his voice still laced with skepticism. How much are you actually making from that? Enough to pay taxes? Alex, you need a long-term plan. This isn't sustainable. But I could see the subtle change in his eyes. When I mentioned a small investor had contacted me, he didn't immediately cut me off with a critique. He even asked for details about the business model and market potential. That, for my dad, was like saying, "You've won the Nobel Prize." I knew I was gaining momentum. I was building something real, not just a fleeting hobby. I had endured countless sleepless nights, crushing failures, and the chilling criticisms from my own family. But I hadn't given up. And now the fruits of my labor were slowly, undeniably showing. The defining moment arrived in November when I received an email from the Indie Game Showcase, one of the biggest events for independent game developers on the West Coast. My game had been selected to be featured at the event. This was a huge honor, a chance to present my work to thousands of people, including major publishers and media outlets. I invited my parents. I know you're busy, but this is a big deal for me. I'd really like you to come see. There was a long silence. Finally, my dad spoke, his voice different. We'll try to make it work, but don't get your hopes up too high. I knew that was their way of saying, we'll be there. My heart pounded with excitement. This wasn't just a game showcase. This was my moment. My moment to show them, not just with words, but with action, that I was right. I wasn't doing this to get back at them. I was doing this to validate myself, and they would have to watch. The day of the Indie Game Showcase finally arrived. I stood in front of my booth, which I had spent months designing and setting up. A large screen displayed my game's demo, and a curious line of people had already formed to play it. I'd meticulously prepared my presentation, but my heart was still pounding like a drum. This wasn't just an event, it was the final test. Amidst the buzzing crowd, I saw them, my parents. They stood a little distance from my booth, my dad still wearing his familiar serious expression, my mom looking around, perhaps a little out of place in the vibrant, chaotic energy of the Game Expo. I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. As my presentation began, I stepped onto the small stage set up in the display area. The lights shone on me, and I started to speak. I didn't just talk about the game's mechanics or graphics. I talked about the story behind it, the story of doubt, of pursuing passion, of finding your voice when the world, and sometimes your own family, thinks you'll flop. I spoke about how the characters in my game had to overcome unbelievable odds, find strength from within, and redefine victory. I looked directly at my parents, standing in the crowd, and I knew every word I spoke was for them, not as an accusation, but as a shared truth. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, and then the entire room erupted in applause. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was a roaring ovation. People playing my game at the booth cheered. Several major publishers approached, handing me business cards and expressing keen interest. I stepped off the stage, feeling light and energized, and then I saw them approaching, my parents. My dad was the first to speak. His voice was still deep, but the coldness and skepticism were gone. Alex, he said, and I saw something shimmer in his eyes, something I'd never seen before. Your presentation, it was impressive, and the game, it's unique. My mom was more emotional. She grabbed my hand, squeezing it so tightly I could feel each of her fingers. Alex, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I, I'm so sorry. I didn't believe in you. I was wrong. I said nothing, just hugged her tightly. It was the hug I had yearned for so long, the hug of unconditional acceptance. My dad placed a hand on my shoulder. We always wanted you to succeed, son, but perhaps we were too rigid about how you should achieve it. I looked at them, the people who had defined success for me for so many years, and now they stood there, witnessing my success on my own terms. I didn't do this to prove you wrong, I said, my voice soft. I did this to prove myself right, to know what I'm capable of when I truly believe in myself. My parents nodded, perhaps finally understanding. After that event, my game quickly became a phenomenon. Major publishers offered lucrative deals. I chose a trusted partner, not just for the money, but because they believed in my vision. My game was widely released, garnering millions of downloads and countless awards. My YouTube channel exploded, becoming a platform where I shared not just game stories, but also my own journey, about overcoming doubt, about finding my path. My relationship with my parents didn't become perfect overnight, but it began to heal. They started attending my launches, reading articles about me, and even proudly showing off their artist son to their friends. They were still pragmatic, but they had learned a vital lesson about the value of unconventional dreams. I continued to develop games, create new stories, and inspire millions. I wasn't just a content creator or a game developer. I was a voice for young people struggling to be themselves. My success wasn't revenge, it was validation. Validation that everyone has their own path, and sometimes the hardest road leads to the greatest things. It was proof that your inner voice matters more than any external criticism. And most importantly, it was a reminder that you are the only one who truly gets to define your own success. To this day, I still work tirelessly, always learning and creating. Every time I look at my computer screen, every time I receive a message from a fan saying my story inspired them, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And that is the greatest success my parents and I could ever witness.